Usually, when a person first quits, they still link a good amount of pleasure and positive benefits to drinking. They probably link quite a bit of pain and negative consequences too. But almost always at the beginning, when a person quits drinking, early, very early alcohol recovery, they have to repress the desire for alcohol. They have to throttle it. Repress it, throttle it, suppress it. And that's not a good long-term strategy because that takes a shitload of willpower. And that is really hard to maintain. There's definitely strategies and tactics for staying in long-term recovery that are general, that work for pretty much everybody. And then there's ways to further, customize and choose and select more specifications within those overarching categories. There's also different frames or philosophies about what recovery is, what success in long-term recovery is, sobriety. We'll frame this with two different things. When you look at addiction recovery, alcohol recovery in general, the mainstream system of the stages or the phases of recovery, they call it the stages of change. The stages of change shows somebody when they go from having an alcohol or a drug problem but being in denial to all of a sudden thinking they may have a problem with it. Now they're like, I may or may not have a problem. And then they realize they have a problem and then they want to do something about it. So how this goes is stage one is pre-contemplation. That's the stage where they don't even think they have an alcohol problem. And if somebody calls them out on it, they'll say, what are you, crazy? I don't have a problem at all. They haven't even begun the contemplation that they have an issue. Contemplation, they start contemplating that they might have an issue. Action is when people start to do something about the problem drinking or the drugs or whatever. Action could be doing research. It could be calling a treatment program. It could be learning online. It could be talking to somebody and asking questions. It could be planning out the day you're going to quit. All that kind of stuff is action. It could be the physical detox from alcohol and getting through post-acute withdrawal. That's all action, but eventually you move into what they call maintenance. Maintenance is long-term recovery. The cool thing is that even though this is a mainstream model, they even have the transcendence of addiction built into this mainstream model. If it was a lifelong incurable disease, then maintenance would be the last phase now, wouldn't it? That's what they say at AA meetings, that lifelong maintenance means you have to go to AA and participate in it for the rest of your life, meaning you're always susceptible to alcohol addiction and being activated again. Well, in the mainstream, it doesn't end at maintenance. They have another stage, which is called relapse or slip. So that's when they're in long-term recovery, then they either have a slip, which is just maybe a day or a week, but then they don't get back into active addiction. They just drink sometimes or they use some drugs, but they don't go back into the lifestyle of addiction. Then a relapse is they do go back into the lifestyle of addiction. Well, if a person makes it long enough in maintenance, and slips and relapses are very common, they don't have to be, but they are, then you get to termination. Termination, what does that mean? It means you're done. You're not in maintenance. You're not in long-term recovery anymore. You're where Chris and I are. We're not in maintenance, long-term recovery. We're not susceptible to becoming alcohol addicts again. There's no way. There's just no way. Under the right circumstances, it would be possible, but those circumstances and lifestyle situations would have to be so conducive to alcohol addiction, and I would have to really let myself get very weakened. So that's termination. Then you move on with your life, and yeah, it's still something that you want to be cognizant about, but through that long-term maintenance or recovery, you learn wisdom, you learn self-love. The ultimate is to transcend addiction, and so my model is the phases of recovery, which very closely model the stages of change, but I built this mental model, operational and cognitive framework for people that are already at the action phase. I'm not working with people that are in pre-contemplation or contemplation. I'm only working with and making content for 99.99% of the time, people that are already in action or they're about to get into action. Interventionists, that's their job, is to help people that are in contemplation or pre-contemplation. If you've ever watched the show Intervention on A&E, an award-winning show that can be very triggering for a lot of people, but they have an interventionist there, and the person that has the alcohol and or drug problem does not want to get help, at least at that time, and they have to pull out this leverage, this extrinsic incentives and massive leverage. If you don't accept this treatment that's being offered to you, you're not going to be able to get money from us anymore. You're not going to be able to live here, or I'm going to take the kids. So the interventionist helps the families and loved ones not only create boundaries and extrinsic incentives that they will outline and also enforce, but they'll also give them this other option. It's like, hey, you want to get help anyways, this is the best for you. My phases of recovery go like this. Preparation, phase 1. That's technically action, but you're not technically tapering off of alcohol, or you're not cold turkey quitting alcohol. Preparation is all the stuff that you do, the research, the learning, classes like this, calling programs and getting your questions answered. It could be ordering supplements. It could be, shopping for foods and going to your doctor to getting a benzo prescription for a week or a few days. That's all preparation. Phase 2, detoxification. That's when you're lowering alcohol, tapering, or all at once. And then what you're talking about for recovery strategies, for staying in long-term recovery and finding success in it, that's when you get to the next 2 phases after. So after detox is repair. Most people have post-acute withdrawal at least a little bit. Some people don't, but I view repair as the phase right after you quit alcohol. It only takes a few days for alcohol to get out of your system. So the acute detoxification withdrawal syndrome is usually only a few days if a person even has a withdrawal syndrome. Not everybody does, depending on how much they drink and other factors. But then repair is repairing the neurotransmitters, liver, gut health, all that. The next phase after that is rewire. That's long-term recovery. That's when your brain is rewiring your neural pathways that when neurons fire together, they wire together. Through neuroplasticity, the life and the habits and the choices and decisions and behaviors of alcohol addiction, those become wired in your brain really powerfully. So those grooves, so those pathways become really easy to go down. So when you're stressed out, when you're tired, when you're lonely, when you're hungry, when you're around alcohol, those pathways get activated. They're just so easy because they've been activated so many times and they've built a lot of myelin sheath around them. These are like 8-lane superhighways of the addictive process and the addictive cravings and the behaviors. So long-term recovery in the rewire phase, that's the process of you staying abstinent from alcohol no matter what, while slowly those neural pathways fade away. The longer you do not activate them, the more they'll fade away. And the key is, over on top of them in their place, you start to build through pro-recovery habits, neural pathways that support alcohol freedom, that support things like journaling and healthy diet and all that, resilience. So that's a long-term process, unfortunately. The good news is that we used to believe that once you killed all your brain cells from alcohol or drugs or toxins, you didn't grow them back and you were done for. The good news is that we were dead wrong about that, or they were dead wrong about that. And through neurogenesis, we can create new brain cells and we can create new brain pathways, neural pathways. And we can, by not engaging old pathways, we can lose those. Those can fade away. And then through nutrigenomics, which is customized diet, exercise, supplementation, and other natural therapies and lifestyle remedies, that can downregulate genes that support addiction, and it can upregulate genes that support really good mental health and good mood and energy without alcohol. So as far as tips and strategies for staying in long-term recovery, the number one strategy guaranteed is accountability. If you don't have accountability, you could have all the other strategies combined really in high amounts and high potencies. But if you're not accountable to any other human being, then it's pretty hard to do. It's easier to do if you have no desire for alcohol whatsoever. But that's almost never the case. Usually, when a person first quits, they still link a good amount of pleasure and positive benefits to drinking. They probably link quite a bit of pain and negative consequences too. But almost always at the beginning, when a person quits drinking, early, very early alcohol recovery, they have to repress the desire for alcohol. They have to throttle it, repress it, throttle it, suppress it. And that's not a good long-term strategy because that takes a shitload of willpower. And that is really hard to maintain. Even with accountability, that can be difficult. If you use Randy as a case example, he's done a bunch of pro-recovery habits like supplementation, exercise, journaling, pet therapy, and love and connection, and a whole lot more, all these classes. But the biggest thing that he's done that I think has helped him the most is doing the nightly accountability posting on Facebook, on the TAR2 group, secret Facebook group, every single night for probably 80 days by now. I think last night was the 80th night. he has done a Facebook post without fail, no matter how busy he is. And that's his accountability check-in, saying, I didn't drink today, and then giving extra stuff too on how he didn't drink and how his day went. And so accountability, by far, there's nothing else that's better than accountability. When you have the desire to drink still in early alcohol recovery, then while you're throttling that desire, repressing it, which takes a lot of willpower, then if you have strong accountability, means you're answerable to somebody else. And if you do drink, there's going to be some type of hell for you to pay and some type of pain for you to experience and endure, and might even be shame and guilt because you went against your word. You broke a promise. You were incongruent with your words and promises and actions. And so accountability, optimization, not just accountability, but for each person, depending on their tendency type and their lifestyle and other variables, different types and modes of accountability are going to be more or less effective for them. For instance, if someone's holding you accountable, but you don't respect the person or care for them very much, then you're probably not going to care if you start drinking again. But if you respect the person a lot and you really care about them and how they see you, then that's super powerful accountability, because you're not going to want to fail them. When I moved back into my parents' house to overcome addiction, when I couldn't do it on my own, they gave me so much accountability, and they had leverage against me. The accountability was, if I started drinking again, my mom was going to know for sure. I could probably hide it from my dad for a couple weeks or months. There's no way I could hide anything from my mom. She knew everything just by looking at me. Yeah, so that was major accountability. When I coach people, if they also have a really high intrinsic drive to not drink, then that's a powerful form of accountability. But it's even 100 times stronger if they live with somebody, too, preferably a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, that is also holding them accountable and being supportive. They're being supportive. I'm holding them accountable and coaching them and educating them and guiding them through this. But the spouse, the boyfriend or girlfriend is giving lots of practical support, emotional support. They're not your recovery coach. But when you have a live-in accountability system and a professional or a really good peer accountability, like AA meetings work great for a very small percentage of people, and it's great accountability for them. I could care less about being accountable to anybody there, my sponsor included. It was never effective accountability for me personally, not at all. The first time I went, when I had to, well, I didn't have to. My lawyer told me it would be really good to get 90 meetings signed off in 90 days for my felony arraignment, possession of marijuana for sales. And so I did that. I had an agenda. It wasn't my own intrinsic desire to go to AA meetings. Hell no, especially not 90 in 90 days. But I actually started to like it at the beginning. I had the pink cloud phenomenon, which is this kind of 24/7 serenity that everything's going to be okay. And you get lots of synchronicities, lots of divine God or universe type things seem to happen under the pink cloud. But that shit went away. That shit went away, and I started drinking again, and I thought I could control it again. And then I didn't quit for another 8 years after that. And I damaged my own life and health and credit score and finances and relationships so much. So as far as long-term recovery, accountability is the best. Number two, I would probably say, and these are all subjective, but another really important one is a pro-recovery anti-addiction diet. In the Mastering Supplements for Alcohol Recovery course, in Module 2, they learned supplements. Module 3, they learned nutrition and the pro-recovery diet. The good mood foods and the emotionally hazardous edibles, the good mood foods, the pro-recovery diet. They learned exercise and now natural and assisted biohacking. So that's all the physical recovery capital over the span of 6 weeks. And then the other program, Mindset Mastery, Make Alcohol Mood Again with Mindset Mastery. That's all the psychological, social, and spiritual recovery capital program. So for long-term recovery, accountability, big time, especially early recovery, and then using the hierarchy of recovery, which is a pyramid, that on the bottom is your foundation of treatment, because your brain is physical and alcohol is physical, and the foundation of treatment and repair is physical. Biochemical, biological, physical, supplements, nutrition, exercise, etc. Mindset's really important, and psychology, social, spiritual. What you do for long-term is you constantly searching out for your missing links in the bio, psycho, social, environmental, and spiritual pillars of your hierarchy. So for example, let's say 4 years into alcohol recovery, Let's say all of a sudden things have been going good, but you go through a breakup. Let's say you go through a divorce. 4 years strong, alcohol free, haven't had cravings in 3 years, and 3.5 years maybe. You go through a divorce and you lose all your friends too, because they were let's say your husband's friends were your friends and they all went with the husband. Now you're a divorced woman. Let's say you're 55 years old. Your kids are moved out of the house. Now you bet your ass you have some missing links in the psycho and social pillars, and probably the biochemical and spiritual, because a divorce is so devastating to your whole mind, body, spirit complex. Divorce destroys everything. So then you're going to have some major missing links, even if you are doing good self-care, unless you're a human that doesn't have any empathy, aka a sociopath, which I highly doubt anybody in here is one of those. And when you have a 10 out of 10 level of pain and negative consequences that your brain associates with and values, perceives towards alcohol, and you only have a 1 out of 10 level of pleasure and positive benefits that you view as alcohol having, now it's a completely moot substance that holds no practical or any other benefits for you. It's a total moot substance, non-issue, and long-term recovery and alcohol abstinence becomes completely automatic when you have those neuroassociations. It all boils down to the simplest denominator of 2 scores: pain and pleasure. I've said this a million times lately, but it bears repeating. The whole entire universe or the multiverse, whatever it is, it's all built on polarity. Polarity is opposite. Well, there's the pain-pleasure polarity in 2 spots. And all these things too, all these universal laws, they're consistent in the macro and the micro. And so one of them is pain and pleasure. And we have a pain-pleasure balance beam in our brain. Its mode of operation is it wants to be in homeostasis. So every time you drink, that's tapping the pleasure side. And then when you stop drinking, if you've been doing a bunch of that easy pleasure stuff, then your pain-pleasure balance tips to the side of pain. And there's a bunch of gremlins putting weight on that. And so your experience is pain, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So that makes people want to drink alcohol more. What I'm talking about here is the pain-pleasure principle. And that means that, mind, body, spirit complexes in this crazy universe, but everything we do is either to avoid pain or gain pleasure. And that includes drinking alcohol, and that includes abstaining from alcohol. So if you link a high score on a scale of 1 out of 10, if you link a lot of pleasure and positive benefits to alcohol, doesn't matter how much pain you link to it. If you also link a lot of pleasure and positive benefits, it's probably going to be impossible to stay quit long-term recovery. With immense accountability and extrinsic incentives, you might be able to do it for a while. Charlie Sheen used to do it. As a people pleaser, they would beg him to go to recovery. So he'd go into treatment, but not because he wanted to, not even one bit, only to please them. And then he would please them. And then once they were pleased, he'd get back into doing it, doing drugs and alcohol. But then he would eventually get busted again because he couldn't manage it, because he's an extremist, or he was an extremist. He probably still is. And extremists, when they find something that they really, really, really love, they do it to the extreme, whether it's a good habit or a bad habit. The number one equation is how much pain and pleasure you link to alcohol. And then your goal is do whatever you can to link a 10 out of 10 pain and negativity to alcohol and a 1 out of 10 pleasure and positivity to alcohol. If you do that, you don't have to worry about all these other things, because you're no longer suppressing, throttling, and, shoving down that desire. You're no longer casting the desire to drink alcohol into your shadow. You're doing shadow work and you're growing from it.